mocked his birthday gift in front of the whole restaurant. He paid the bill and left me there. It's been a long while since I was on this app, and even then, it was always for something completely unrelated. A recipe or a TV show I decided to learn more about, something like that. Of course, I'd definitely heard of the infamous cheating stories, but I never imagined that I'd write one, much less star in it. But I guess life is funny like that. Speaking of life being funny, none of this would have happened if it weren't for me attending a baby shower. How ironic is it that gift giving is what started this whole thing, and now it might just be what will end my marriage? But I'm getting ahead of myself and probably confusing all of you. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ella, female, 33, and I'm a librarian. I've been one for almost 10 years now, kinda. I've always loved reading and being around books. It was why I got a job working in a library while I was also getting my English degree. I had dreams of becoming some big-time editor, maybe even a publisher or a literary agent, but after college, I'd been in the library for years. I knew the entire place like the back of my hand, and the pay was pretty decent, so I decided to stay instead. The thing about staying where it's comfortable and never actually branching out or leaving your comfort zone is that you have to watch people surpass you, and you can't get mad or upset or jealous because you chose to stay in one place. When my younger sister told me that she was not only getting married but expecting a kid, my first instinct was to be upset, to feel just a little bit slighted. It didn't seem fair to me that she was so ahead of me, married where I was struggling to maintain unstable relationships, and pregnant where I had never even considered children because of said unstable relationships. Even when it came to her job, she was doing better. She was a writer for a women's magazine, a very popular one, and it seemed she couldn't write a single story suburban millennial women wouldn't swoon over. My bitterness felt unearned because, like I said, it wasn't my place to complain. I chose to stay in the library, so even though I really didn't want to go to a baby shower where all the ways she had succeeded and I had fallen short would be rubbed in my face, I went anyway to show support. Because I loved my baby sister, and also because our mom would have never let me live it down had I missed it. The baby shower was needlessly extravagant in my opinion, but I didn't really expect anything less. Chuck, her husband, who I could barely stand on a good day, was some kind of tech bro and seemed to never run out of money. So it made sense why the house decorations for a simple baby shower seemed very Kardashian-inspired. I was greeted at the door with a kiss on the cheek from my sister before she snatched my gift for her out of my hands and waddled away. I was left on my own and was expected to socialize with a range of people I'd never met before. I spent hours wandering around the house instead and helping myself to all the food that was laid out. I finally stopped my pointless journey when I got to the backyard, which was littered with a crazy amount of toys and play sets. Some gifted, most purchased by Chuck, no doubt. For a moment I was able to put my bitterness aside and admire the place. Growing up had been hard for the two of us. Our parents struggled to make ends meet, and any extra money they did make went to better quality food or repairs on the house. They could never afford toys. The little we had to play with was what our mom could scavenge from donation bins at church. So I was glad that she now had the means to provide for her kid like that, and maybe a little jealous too. I was in the middle of thinking back to when we were younger when I heard someone say from behind me that at least the kid would never get bored. That made me laugh a little, so I turned around and there was Martin, male, 35. He immediately stood out to me. Unlike everyone else inside, excluding family members and friends, he wasn't exactly prim nor proper. He looked rugged, like he worked with his hands. He did not look like he worked in finance or a women's magazine, and I definitely would have remembered him if he was some friend of the family or third cousin. He introduced himself and explained that he was a friend of one of Chuck's friends and had been invited by said friend. He decided to show up because he had the day off of work and had nothing better to do, but immediately regretted it when he got there and saw the kinds of people inside. Something we had in common. We talked for a while about a lot of things. That was how I found out that he was in construction and also did carpenting when he could, confirming my suspicion that he was nothing like the people inside. I told him about being a librarian and my love for books, about my dream to one day write my own. Eventually, it was time to go inside and watch my sister open some of the presents. It wasn't fun to watch her pretend to be shocked that something suspiciously blender-shaped turned out to be a blender. What was fun, though, was the little game Martin and I played where we would try to guess the item before she could reveal it. He beat me several times. By the end of the night, my day had completely turned up because of him, so when he asked me for my number, I didn't even think twice before giving it to him. We proceeded to text each other for the next few weeks. I was completely surprised at how much I liked him and how easy it felt to talk to him. One day, out of nowhere and after weeks of talking to him, he showed up at the library and asked me out on a date. The gesture was sweet and appreciated, but poorly timed since I couldn't exactly up and leave, but he offered to wait for me until it was time for my break. After that, we went to a small restaurant to get coffee. Before I knew it, we had been dating for months and he was my boyfriend. We both had busy schedules and couldn't always see each other, but he was by far the most stable relationship I'd ever had. We dated for a few years, and unsurprisingly, things started to get serious. We started to talk about the possibility of getting married and of having kids. Years into dating him, I knew I loved Martin, but I was still very hesitant to marry him, and the only reason was because of his financial situation. Construction workers don't exactly make a lot of money. I mean, neither did librarians, and that was why I was so worried. We were both working minimum wage jobs and living in small apartments. It just didn't make sense to get married. I kept pushing the conversation off for as long as I could, but eventually Martin got impatient and proposed anyway. It felt awful to tell him no, but I really felt like I didn't have a choice. What kind of future would we be signing ourselves up for if I had agreed? Growing up in a very low-income household was hard enough. There was no way that I was going to sign myself up for it again. Financials aside, he was everything that I wanted. He was beautiful for starters, but there was so much more to him than that. He was thoughtful and kind and went out of his way to do things for me and make sure that I was comfortable. Acts of service are giving love language. He was the best boyfriend I had ever had. I loved Martin and I loved being with him, so it really was no surprise that he eventually wore me down. By the 4th year of us being together and by his 3rd proposal, I finally said yes. He went out of his way to assure me that everything would be all right and that he'd make sure that we'd never want for anything. So we got married. It was nothing special. We had a courthouse wedding and then a small party at his apartment afterwards. It was small and quaint, but it all had a cozy, warm feeling to it that I liked, and I thought that if our lives together continued to have that feeling, then nothing would matter except that we were together. I was wrong, of course, and that feeling eventually lost its effect before quickly fizzling out. The first few years that we were married were great. We pooled our resources together to buy a small house, and we saved a lot of money on furniture, since Martin could and did just build most of what we needed. We were hopelessly in love, and coming home every night felt like taking off a heavy weight. It was a relief to be around him, but soon enough, our dwindling finances started to become a problem. Martin lost his job at the agency he'd worked for years and had to start taking up more freelance work and odd jobs. All my efforts to leave the library and get work at a publishing house bore no fruit. It was rejection after rejection, and soon the upset that we both felt started to bleed into the house and into our marriage. The house needed repairs, most of which he could handle. But there were some things we had to hire people for, and we seemed to go through groceries as fast as humanly possible. Or at least he did anyway. He was constantly hungry and always eating. The bills started to pile up just as quick as the resentment and things between us turned a bit sour. Because of that, I started taking up night shifts at the library again, something I hadn't done since college. I did it to get away from the house and to get away from him. There I could read when things were less busy and enjoy hours of peace and quiet. It was during one of those night shifts that things would change forever, not just my life but the trajectory of our marriage. All with a simple conversation and an expensively crafted card. About an hour till it was time to lock up the library, someone came in. I told them, like I did to everyone that came in that late, that they had better hurry up because I would be closing soon. I wasn't exactly rude, but I wasn't exactly polite either. Nearly a decade in that place had gotten rid of the cheery, overeager tone I'd used to greet customers. The person, a handsome man in a suit of all things, asked me if that was how I treated all of my readers, and I responded with, "The late ones, yeah," which seemed to amuse him for whatever reason. Then he said that he was looking for a specific book on a specific historical period. It was one that I had remembered seeing when I was doing inventory, and one that wasn't currently on any of the shelves. So I led him to the back rooms where there were boxes and boxes of books, some in good condition and others missing everything but a few chapters, courtesy of some of the more rowdy and rebellious kids in the area, and he stayed way too close to me the entire time. We searched for the book together because it was too much work for just me alone, and our hands kept brushing together. I remember blushing and then immediately feeling like some idiot schoolgirl for doing so. There was this weird tension between us, and I had no idea what to make of it. So once we found the book, I quickly processed it. Surprisingly, he had a library card, and handed it back to him, anything to get him to leave. But he lingered afterwards. He almost seemed desperate to talk to me, and I tried my best to ignore him. When he noticed that that was what I was doing, he smiled and left me his card before leaving. That was how I found out that his name was Russell, and he was some kind of entrepreneur. Obviously rich and pretty arrogant. I threw away the card but couldn't stop thinking about him. I thought about the interaction for a few weeks after, and when I was convinced that he would probably never show up again, he walked into the library, placed the book in front of me, told me he was there to return it, and then asked me out to dinner. I was dumbfounded, and I had to look at my hand to make sure my ring was still on it. It was there. He was just overconfident and didn't seem to mind that I was married, apparently. I obviously told him no, and he looked like he expected me to say that. So he told me to look through the book and give him a call if I changed my mind before leaving another card. In between the pages of the book was an extremely expensive-looking necklace. I was shocked. I couldn't believe what was happening to me. It felt like something out of some cheesy movie. I took the necklace, though, and then returned the book. I didn't throw away the card this time. It took me 3 weeks before I finally caved and called the number on it. I told myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong, since it was just a call, that I was just following up with a reader, but the second he picked up, I couldn't keep lying to myself. He asked if I had changed my mind about his offer, and all I could think about was the necklace he'd gifted me, how expensive it was, how it was the nicest thing that I owned, and how I wanted more. I was tired of the life of struggle that I'd been living for the last few years. I wanted a break, and he, Russell, seemed like the perfect person to give it to me. I agreed to dinner and told Martin that I had to supervise some library event and would probably be home pretty late. Russell picked me up from the library that evening, like I told him to, and he took me to some very expensive restaurant. It was a place with bright lighting, a reservation list, and a foreign name. I allowed him to order for me since I didn't recognize most of the stuff on the menu, and all the guilt I was feeling went out the window when I saw the waiter bring out what was probably the most decadent meal I'd ever seen. We talked throughout the dinner, and he asked me how I liked his gift. I told him that I liked it very much. Of course, I couldn't really wear it out since Martin would notice it and get suspicious, but it was enough to just know I had it, to look at it when I could, and know that I owned something that expensive. It made me feel better about myself and my stagnant life, and I was surprised that I wanted more, much more. At the end of the dinner, he walked me back to his car and opened the door for me. I was surprised at how courteous he was. When we were both in the car, he reached for my hand and asked me if I wanted something to match the necklace. I was confused but soon became speechless as I watched him pull out a small gift bag from the back seat. I rushed to open it up and saw that it was a box containing earrings that matched the necklace he gave me. They were beautiful. At that point, it felt like I needed to clear the air, so I asked him if he knew I was married. I hadn't bothered to take off my ring during all of our interactions, so he should have known that I was, but by the way he was acting, I wasn't so sure anymore. He told me that he knew that I was, and that he didn't care. Then he leaned in, and I must have gotten swept up in the moment because suddenly I didn't care either. He kissed me and I kissed him back. I was blinded by everything that had happened, the necklace, the nice dinner, the earrings. I knew what would happen when we got to his hotel, and I didn't really care. He was offering me a life I had only ever dreamed of before, a life of luxury and ease, a life that rivaled that of my sisters, minus the secrecy, of course. We had sex that night, and our relationship didn't end there. For months, I told Martin that I had things to take care of at the library, so he wouldn't suspect anything. Meanwhile, Russell and I kind of developed a routine. He would pick me up from the library and then take me out. It was usually to dinner, but sometimes it would be to art galleries or to fancy clubs, and at the end of the night, before we went back to his hotel, he would make sure to gift me something. Most of his gifts, each more expensive than the last, I kept in a large shoebox and hid it in our closet. Most of the time, I would be left with no other choice than to admire them. But sometimes, when I knew that I would hardly see Martin that day, I would wear them out and relish in all the compliments that I would get. Even though Russell was always careful when he picked me up from the library, I forced him to park a bit away from the building, and I always made sure to sneak out when I was done with my shift. Someone eventually caught on. One of my coworkers asked me about him one day and asked where we always went off to so late. I panicked and made up some excuse I can't even remember now. They seemed to drop the issue, but the whole interaction left me spooked because that same coworker had also seen Martin visit me and knew that I was married. I decided then that even though I loved the lifestyle he gave to me, I had to end things with Russell. But I was selfish, and instead of just leaving him outright, I decided to wait until my birthday since it was just around the corner, and since I knew that he would definitely get me something amazing for it. And sure enough, he did. Martin wanted to take me out to dinner for my birthday, so I knew that I couldn't spend the night with Russell. We ended up spending the day together instead. I made up some excuse to Martin about how my sister decided to treat me to a spa day, and that was why I would be gone for most of the afternoon, and he didn't question it. After Russell and I spent the afternoon together, he gifted me a beautiful designer leather bag. It was by far the most expensive gift. The brand name was embossed on it, and the leather was thick and good quality. I couldn't believe he had actually bought it for me, and I couldn't believe that I would hardly ever get to carry it. Maybe Martin would miss a few gold bracelets and earrings, but there was no hiding it. But even that couldn't dim the happiness that I felt. I got back to the house buzzing with excitement, and Martin must have just thought that the spa day had gone really well because he didn't ask me about it. A few hours later, he drove us to the restaurant. It was far cry from the ones that Russell would take me to. This one was more of an upscale diner, no fancy furniture or items on the menu you could barely pronounce, and after months of being treated like a queen by Russell, I couldn't help my disappointment at Martin's choice. We sat down and ordered. The food was okay, not good but not inedible either. The whole thing was very dull, and I found myself wishing we had just spent the night at home or that I hadn't left Russell so early. Eventually we got to dessert, and afterwards he reached for both of my hands. He made a little heartfelt speech about our lives together and how much he loved me, how important our marriage was to him. It was pretty long, and that would have bothered me if I wasn't so affected. His speech was good and everything, but in that moment, I just couldn't help but feel bored. I wanted to be back with Russell doing something fun and interesting, not listening to Martin wax on about our marriage. I obviously couldn't let any of that show, so I smiled and nodded along. I was practically zoning out honestly when something terrible happened. Martin reached under the table and brought out a paper bag. It was my birthday present, and I wasted no time opening it up. Part of me wished that I hadn't, that I had waited until we got home to do it. I stared down at it for a while. It was a framed photo of the first time we met, at the baby shower, both of us looking awkward and like the only thing we wanted was to leave. I laughed at it. I laughed for a while and so hard that I started crying again. It wasn't that I didn't like it. It was sweet and I could understand the sentiment, but my mouth got ahead of me. It's just after literally being gifted a designer bag earlier in the day, this just seemed ridiculous and pathetic in comparison. People turned to watch us as I fought to control my laughter. Only the thought of how humiliated Martin was probably felt was enough to sober me up, and eventually my laughter died down. Again, it was cute, the gift, but we had had years of heartfelt, mildly cringy gifts exchanged between us. Why couldn't he get me something that was actually nice this one time? Martin looked absolutely heartbroken, and I rushed to play the laugh off as something else, to pretend that I was laughing at how uncomfortable we looked in the photo and not mocking him. But he didn't even acknowledge my words. Instead, he just pulled out a small wad of cash and tossed it on the table before he stormed out. By the time I packed up the photo and grabbed my things, it was too late. He was already gone. I had no choice but to take a cab, which took a while, and I rushed inside as soon as it pulled up to the house. Waiting for me on the coffee table was my shoebox. It was upturned and all my presents were spilt onto the table. Martin glared at me as he explained that he'd noticed me wearing an expensive bracelet weeks ago, one he knew that I'd never be able to afford. That was when his suspicions started, and he tried to convince himself that he was just paranoid and confused for weeks. But after the dinner and how I had acted, he finally had more reason to go through my things and find out what had come over me. While I was worrying myself sick in the back of that cab, he was finding my shoebox full of secrets and uncovering all the incriminating things inside. I didn't even know it, but that dinner could have been my second chance. It could have been my way of assuring him that everything was right in our marriage. If I'd played my cards right and put Martin's suspicions at ease, maybe I wouldn't even need to stop seeing Russell. I could have continued getting the best of both worlds, but instead I had laughed in his face and humiliated him in front of everyone. I tried to beg him for one last chance, for him to see that I made a mistake, but that he didn't have to end things because of it, and for him not to give up on us, but he wasn't hearing it. The last thing he said to me before he walked out was that now I could finally wear my presents out in public. It's been only a few days since then, and all my efforts to reach out have gone unanswered. I don't know what to do, or if there's anything I can do. Do I give the gifts back? Or sell them? What can I do to make Martin see that I'm ready to be serious about us now?